Well, we have new news on the BOI requirement. This is the filing you had to make for your LLC or corporation that said who owned 25% or more or who has substantial control. Now, on March 21st, 2025, FinCEN and the Department of Treasury came out with a final rule clarifying who needs to file for BOI. Now, they had issued a press release back in early March saying, don't worry about BOI. We're not going to enforce it. There won't be any penalties. But just 3 days ago, March 21st, 2025, which was the new deadline to file a BOI, Treasury issued an actual binding final ruling. Now, this goes through a process, but this is an actual final ruling from FinCEN and the Department of Treasury. What everyone was relying on a couple weeks ago was just a freaking press release from Treasury that said, don't worry about it. We're not enforcing it. And we're going to come out with a rule that says who needs to file. Well, March 21st, this was just last Friday, they came out with the final ruling, and it is very good for small business owners in the U.S. The primary takeaway here, and I'm going to go through a number of factors you got to consider here, from what authority does the executive branch have, what's going on in the courts with the Texas Top Cop Shop case, and what is pending legislation that could kill this for good. Right now, we kind of have a temporary kill of BOI. It could come back, actually. So I want you to hang tight here because I want to go over what could happen next. But the nice thing is the final rulemaking that came out from Treasury said, if you are a domestic reporting company under the law, you do not need to file. This is the actual language that came out in the final rule. I've got it right here. It says, under this interim final rule, entities previously defined as domestic reporting companies, this means U.S. LLCs or corporations, are exempted from the reporting requirements and do not have to report BOI to FinCEN or update or correct BOI previously reported to FinCEN. In other words, if you're a U.S. LLC or corporation with U.S. citizens as owners, even non-U.S. citizens as owners, but you're a U.S. corporation or LLC, you do not need to file. Now, I'm going to go into some other areas here on how do they have that authority. It's kind of a tricky area of the law here. Is this going to actually stand up? But what is going to need to be reported is any foreign companies. So if you're a foreign LLC or corporation, you're going to still need to comply with BOI. But for most of us, business owners, small business owners across the U.S., you do not need to file the BOI. And this is an actual legal rulemaking from the Treasury Department that you can rely on. What we had 2 weeks ago was a press release from Treasury, indicative of where they're going, but you can't hold that up in court and say, I don't need to file this. Now we have actual rulemaking, which is administrative law from the Treasury Department saying you don't need to file. Now, here's the interesting part of the law. We all know the legislative branch passes law. The president signs it into law. The Corporate Transparency Act was signed into law about 3 or 4 years ago. This was at the end of the Trump administration, right when Biden came in, he actually signed this. Now, the Corporate Transparency Act in the law itself gave an escape hatch for any executive branch to get out of it and to define who they want to go after under the law. Here's what was in the law, because executive branch can't write the law. Like the Treasury Department can't just write a rule like this and say, hey, there's this law on the books. We're going to issue a regulation or a rule and say, nah, we're not going to enforce it. They actually can't do that unless the law gave them that power. Now, here's what was in the Corporate Transparency Act. This is really, really important. This is what was in the law itself. It says the Corporate Transparency Act authorizes the Secretary of the Treasury to exempt any other entity or class of entities from which the Secretary, with the written concurrence of the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security, by regulation has determined that the required beneficial ownership information or class of entities would not serve the public interest and would not be highly useful in national security, intelligence, or law enforcement agency efforts to prosecute money laundering, the financing of terrorism, proliferation of finance, serious tax fraud, or other crimes. In other words, if the Secretary of the Treasury, in conjunction with the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security say, we don't think this group of people is worth going after and making them file a BOI, they can say and make a regulation or rule and say, we're not going after them. Well, that's what they just did. That's what this rule is that I just said when they say domestic companies. So they are defining all U.S. LLCs and corporations as not being in the public interest to chase after for money laundering. So this is a huge win for small business owners, many of whom had found this to be a huge burden. It's another thing you had to file with your LLC or corporation. It's another thing you have to update. So this is a big win because the Corporate Transparency Act itself gave the executive branch an escape hatch to get out of this. Now, there is a problem, though. What's the problem? Who's going to be in the White House in another 3 or 4 years? If you have a Democrat administration or maybe a different Republican president has a different outlook on this, this could come back to life. And so it's not a permanent kill. That's why I say the BOI is temporarily dead because the Trump administration is like, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. All of this hassle we have to have on businesses to go file this thing is not worth it for us to then take that information to go and try to curb money laundering or financing of terrorism. There's other ways they could do that without burdening small business. Now, in their rulemaking themselves, the Treasury Department determined that this rule was going to cost an annual $3 billion in costs, and the initial reporting is going to cost $21 billion. This is costs out of the economy just going to compliance for this regulation. So they have to decide, is the benefit and these crimes that we think we can prohibit, that was the purpose of the Corporate Transparency Act, is all this information that these LLCs and corporations would file would help the Treasury Department go determine who is doing money laundering or using the money in these companies for illegal means. And there's a suspicion that LLCs and corporations are used to hide money and to finance terrorism and to do a lot of unlawful activity. Well, a lot of people said, yeah, but is making every small business owner file a BOI going to help that? That might be the case, and that is the case, that LLCs and corporations can be used improperly, but making everybody file, how does that help? And doesn't the Treasury Department have a list of who owns all these companies? Because you have to report that on your tax return, whether it's a K-1 or a 1099 div saying who a shareholder is that's making money. So it's a little tricky, and it's difficult for a lot of small business owners to comprehend because doesn't Treasury already have this information? So why do we have to file another thing? And what is Treasury going to do with that they're not already doing with the tax return and reporting information they could have on these companies? All right, so let me go over a couple of important points. I want to go over the 3 issues you got to understand and the 3 different ways this can go in terms of enforcement. So right now we know it's killed. The Trump administration entered in their final rulemaking, but a next administration could say, oh, BOI's back. You're going to need to file this in 3 or 4 years. Now, this is almost like a civics class, right? I feel like we're back in like government class in college or high school about how government works. Okay, the executive branch enforces the law, and they can enter in rulemaking or administrative procedures and administrative law only if the law allows them. Now, the Corporate Transparency Act here, within the law itself, it gave broad discretion to the Secretary of Treasury to limit the rule, which is what the Trump administration is doing. They're taking that loophole and freaking driving a truck through it right now to say, actually, all U.S. LLCs and corporations don't need to file it. So, but there was an opening there in the law itself that gave them broad authority to interpret this. A lot of times Congress gets pissed off because they're like, hey, we passed this law, executive branch, you need to go enforce it. But now they're going to say, hey, we passed this law and gave you authority to decide who to go after and what rulemaking you want to enter into. And now the Trump administration has done this. So the law opened the door here for the Trump administration to limit who needs to file, which is what they've done here. Again, US-based LLCs and corporations do not need to file. That is now in the law. There is a temporary kind of comment period that goes through, but this is the Treasury's way they want to go. It's pretty clear this is going to be entered into law. All right, so that's the executive branch. Now, the other way this could be killed is the judiciary branch, okay? The Supreme Court has the Texas Top Cop Shop case. That is the primary case that worked its way through the court. This is what we've been reporting on and letting you guys know about here on my channel. You know, a federal district court said it was unconstitutional. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals said, actually, it is constitutional. You do need to file. Then the 11th Circuit overturned themselves and said, no, it is unconstitutional. Then it went to the Supreme Court, and it's been a whole mess of back and forth in the courts. But right now, the U.S. Supreme Court has this Texas Top Cop Shop case and is determining whether the law is constitutional or not. And if the Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional, it's done. The Trump administration doesn't need to do anything. It doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter what new law Congress tries to pass. It is done. So that would be the best result, frankly, for any small business owners or people who don't want the BOI to go into effect, is just let it die at the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, they're having hearings on it right now within the next 30 days. I think the hearing at the Supreme Court will occur, but you won't get a decision until the fall of this year. So it's going to be a while until we know where things land at the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, stay tuned, of course. I'll be updating you on that because that could really be the final death knell, and that would be a good outcome. Again, what's happened in the executive branch is just a temporary kill, because we could have a new president that could have a different interpretation of the law, a different secretary of the Treasury that says, no, every U.S. LLC and corporation needs to file this. All right, now the next issue that's going right now is the legislative branch, okay? Congress right now, this is who makes the law. The president signs the law, and it's definite Trump would sign a law that would kill this. But the legislative branch right now, Congress has a bill pending that would kill BOI. For U.S.-based LLCs and corporations. This is the Repealing Big Brother Act. Okay, this does have some bipartisan support, but Congress is paralyzed with their funding bill and all these other things, and so they haven't really prioritized this as an initiative to go through and pass right now. So, but that is still working its way through Congress right now, and maybe by the time the Trump administration's done, that bill gets through and is done, and then it's killed in the law again. And the only way you'd be able to bring BOI back is you probably have a change of Congress and a change in the president, where you've got a Democrat Senate and House and a Democrat in the White House. Although the first BOI and the Corporate Transparency Act was actually passed on a bipartisan basis, with the Trump administration, there are definitely being political lines drawn here, Republicans against it, Democrats in favor of it, for the most part. All right, so again, two ways this could be permanently killed, either through legislation, repealing Big Brother Act, or the U.S. Supreme Court declaring it unconstitutional, and that is the Texas Top Cop Shop case. But right now, the Treasury Department has issued their interim rule, which will go into effect here in the next 30 to 60 days, that says, and this is their rule right now. I mean, you can go read it on FinCEN.gov. They issued this on March 21st at the end of the day. And again, it says any domestic reporting companies, this means domestic means U.S.-based LLC or corporation, any U.S. LLC, any setup in any state in the U.S., LLC or corporation, your domestic reporting company, you do not need to file this BOI. And for any of you that have filed already, there's nothing you can do. You can't pull back a filing. But the nice thing about this interim rule is even if you have filed and you're a U.S.-based LLC or corporation, and I filed 14 or 15 for my own companies. We filed thousands for our clients at KKOS Lawyers, my law firm, when we're setting up entities, because you had to. Right? There's $500 a day penalties. And also in our company compliance business, Main Street Business Services, we're doing this for clients every year. We maintain their corporation LLC. We filed thousands of those for our clients there. Now, you don't need to file it now. So we're not filing. And that's our recommendation now to anybody, whether you're a client of ours or you're watching here. I mean, this isn't meant to be legal advice, engage a lawyer, but you can rely on this interim order. Go check it out. It's very clear that if you're a U.S.-based LLC or corporation, you don't need to file it. Now, you can go to FinCEN.gov and still file right now. Okay. A lot of people, I even got a message over the weekend from a client. It's like, I'm confused. They're still taking filings, but they have this interim rule. Well, this interim rule isn't legally in effect right now. They have a comment period and then it goes into effect. But it's pretty clear that this is where the administration's going. If anything, this will probably get more slated against who needs to file. So I don't see this changing. This is definitely where Treasury is planning to go. U.S.-based LLCs and corporations don't need to file. So even though you could file, you don't have to. For any of you that have filed, remember, this is private. This is not a publicly searchable database. A lot of states where you file your LLC or corporation, people can look at who's the manager or the member or owner of a corporation in certain states. Some states keep that private. Some states make it be declared. But that's not what this BOI rule is, and that's not what these BOI reports are. this is the Beneficial Owner Information Report. It is a private filing, kind of like a tax return. No one can go search it and find this out. So it's not like this is going to be publicly available for any of you that have filed. Don't worry about it there. But the rule also says you don't need to amend or update. Don't even worry about it if you're a U.S.-based LLC or corporation. All right, now what should I do moving forward right now? When you're setting up your LLC or corporation, or any of you that have LLCs or corporations, just take this BOI requirement off the table. Of course, you got to file your LLC with the state or your corporation with the state. You go get your EIN from the IRS and the Treasury Department, and you're going to file your necessary tax reports each year. But there is no longer this BOI report you need to file to the federal government. That is gone. This is a brand new thing you never had to do. And that came about in 2023. So that's the update here. I'll make sure all of you know that. Now, make sure you're subscribed to my channel. I'll be giving you the news if this thing is finally dead, either in the U.S. Supreme Court or as legislation maybe working its way through Congress and we get that signed into law. For now, we have a temporary kill, of course, because the Trump administration has been clear. They're not going to enforce this. The Treasury has issued actual final rulemaking, which is in its comment period right now, should go into effect in 30 to 60 days. Now, also on my channel, I want to make sure everyone's aware, I'm giving lots of tips on how to save taxes, protect your assets, grow and build wealth. I want to make sure you're subscribed because I'm always giving updates on those topics. And we'll be coming live to on other topics on saving taxes, setting up your business properly, how to have asset protection and privacy, how to plan for your estate, how to build and grow to your retirement, how to improve your business. I'm Matt Sorensen. We'll see you next time.